Okay, now back down to security, which would be, of course, key management. There's also key recovery and good old PKI. And the majority of crypto systems are only as secure as the keys are going to be. Key management. Responsibilities would include secure key creation and distribution, secure key recovery, plans for users leaving the company, losing keys, and so forth. I know a lot of organizations, they may have, for example, like EFS, or encrypted file system on a Windows box. And if they do, let's say if somebody leaves the organization, I've seen many times to where they get the user account for that individual and they delete the user. Therefore, all the data that was encrypted with that user is no longer accessible. It's basically gone. So what you want to do in that aspect is disable the user account, because you're still going to have their key and still going to be able to get into the item. In the previous versions of Windows, what they ended up doing was they gave the skeleton key to SID 500, which was the local administrator. So what ended up happening is if the key was damaged or lost or whatnot, you can log in as the local admin and then instantly get to all the files on the disk. However, that was seen as being a security issue and has been resolved in some of the newer patches, newer service packs or whatnot, for the SID, because SSID is for Wi-Fi, but the SID 500 or the local admin or domain admin or whatnot, they have the capabilities to change the password, and then you can log in as the individual user and then get the data. So there is still ways to basically get EFS data, decrypt it and whatnot, but it's not as easy as it used to be. Does anybody know a good way on how to, for example, let's say if you get a system with EFS encryption, how would you break into a specific user account if you don't have any of the passwords? You could do Loftcrack. Another way is there's like ERD Commander or several other utilities where you can boot up the system and then insert your hash for the admin or SID 500 into the administrator account, and basically just hijack that account. Once you log in as administrator, you find the target user, and then you change their password. You log out as administrator, then you log in as the new user with that new password. And then the EFS key basically goes through, is still attached to the user, so you can see everything that user has now. The only issue is, as far as forensically speaking, is you can say that, okay, this was inserted, this was actually attacked, we know exactly what happened. So there's other ways of getting it as well, but from an attacker perspective, if they just want to get down and dirty, if they don't have any usernames and passwords, it's probably one of the quickest ways to get into a system, is insert their own hash into the administrator, log in as admin, and then change the password for the target. Okay, there's also secure key storage and destruction. With destruction, it's a huge issue because you don't want any of the keys that are invalid floating around. It's also characteristics. You want to split knowledge and dual control. The length of the key. Since a lot of the algorithms are public knowledge, it comes down to the security of the key and the length of the key as how well the encryption is actually going to work. So again, if you have a 56-bit key, it's not going to be as strong as a 1024-bit key. So the length is a huge issue. Also, key's lifetime should correspond with the sensitivity of the data. If, for example, the sensitivity of the data has it to where it's going to be released to the public 1 year after publication, then you're not going to want to have a key, or you don't have to have a key that's going to last for 20 years. But if you have content that you think is going to be trade secret from 5 years from now, it's probably not a good idea to have the keys die relatively shortly, unless you have really good key management, which basically says, okay, after a year, you have to reset the key and then rebuild a new one, which could be longer, could be a different algorithm altogether. Okay, key should also be presented in clear text anywhere, or should not be, sorry. Definitely nothing should be clear text. Okay, keys should also be backed up or escrowed in case of emergencies. Why would that be a potential benefit?
If you can't get the key, you can't get your...
Right. You can't encrypt the data, decrypt it. Let's say if the key file or your actual card file or whatnot is damaged, then basically the backup, restore it, you can now look at things. Or again, if somebody leaves the organization, then disable the account or whatnot, or they go off-site with their device, they steal the device or the device goes away, you can still get the data and decrypt it because you have the backup key. There are some scenarios, though, it comes back down to the key storage or key management, where that could be dangerous, because if you have it to where the server is easily accessible by everybody, then anybody can steal the keys. So that's why you want to minimize the access and minimize the capabilities of people actually touching the escrow server or the key server.
So would that be considered part of business continuity planning or disaster?
Yes, actually. Definitely. Because a lot of times, let's say, God forbid, something happens to the organization where there's a huge flood, explosion, fire, or whatnot, and it takes out, let's say, a quarter of the computer systems. But out of that, you still have everybody's email on the server, and a lot of them were encrypted. The only way that they'd be able to get to the email would be off the backup server. And in theory, things like this, especially this sensitive or this important of information, should probably be off-site. Again, further than your 100-foot rule. And then the transfer of the keys to off-site should also be encrypted. I know way back in the past, especially when it was symmetric key, you had good old armed courier services. They would actually have the physical symmetric key and go from point A to point B. The problem with that is of course, just the plain cost, but the time involved as well. So before you could communicate back and forth, it would take, let's say, 2 days from them to go from one state to another state so the organization could communicate. There are a lot of things, for example, like HTTPS. It has a really nice way of communicating a secret key back. What it does is it uses basically PKI, uses asymmetric cryptography to basically build an encryption connection. And then once the encrypto connection is built, it sends over the secret key. So then it jumps down to symmetric cryptography. And mainly just because symmetric cryptography is so much faster. Yeah, it's all in the key transfer and the key exchange and key storage. Okay, public key cryptography issues. Users can generate their own public-private key pairs and exchange them, but what trust level is there? When it comes down to it in that aspect, especially with CA servers, that's why a lot of websites will say that this is an untrusted server. Do you want to continue, yes or no? You will see this all the time. There's, for example, currently doing a pen test, and one server, for some reason, they have a certificate authority on it. And the client does not know why it's there, but regardless, go to the website on port 443, and it comes up and says the certificate is from an untrusted known or unknown service. So of course you click yes and then look at the certificate, and it's a weak certificate as well, so it can probably be cracked relatively easy. But the funny part is that because it's not associated with the domain, it's automatically going to be an untrusted server or service. So the browsers nowadays are really good about this. A lot of software programmers, however, are not. For example, if somebody's at this level, like public key, private key scenario, if somebody's using like dsniff, doing a monkey in the middle, or cane enable, using man in the middle, it's basically the same attack, they just call it monkey in the middle on the Linux side. You basically pretend to be somebody else's certificate authority. So you send in your fake SSL certificate to the victim, pretending to be the target server they're connecting to. That whole thing is that you can still create the public-private key pair, but it's up to the browser or up to the client or the target to say, yes, I trust it or not. There are pieces of software out there, though, unlike the browser or not at that level of security of the browser, that says, okay, yes, we got a certificate. I don't care if it's bad or not. I'm just going to use it, and we're going to encrypt on it and keep on going. Mainly because they don't go through basically the on-error type scenarios, or they don't validate it. So that's a huge issue from a programming standpoint. You definitely need to look for is that the browsers almost always ask you, unless you have an advanced attack against you, if it doesn't match, it warns you. If you have software, that needs to be put in there. If you receive a public key from Bob, how do you know it's Bob's key and not Dave's? And it just comes down to the trust level of the certificate. If you have a certificate authority that anybody can generate keys from, then that's a huge problem. I know that there are a lot of groups out there that will offer free PKI certificates. So what it comes down to it is, of course, they're going to host the backup, so that they can probably listen to the communications if they want. for both email and web servers. Because they are on non-reputable sites, it's definitely a good thing that the servers are not trusted by default. But it does have it to where if you wanted to have a quote-unquote secure site through an HTTPS, you use one of their certificates. Whenever people go there, they see that there's a certificate and they see there's an error. It's still going to pop up the error, but it's just going to say it's from an untrusted agent. Do you want to trust it from now on, yes or no? And by doing that, now they're trusting, for example, a hacker site PKI server, which is probably not the best thing to do. Also, you need a trusted third party to vouch for the identity of the owner of the public key, because going back to that service is that it's only as good as the owner of the certificate authority. With that being said, places like Thought, VeriSign, and several others do this, where if you get a certificate, they'll have you go through a vetting process. And the better the vetting process, the more you can trust the actual server. Of course, the back end and security of the server as well. But some of the vetting would be you have to put in driver's license number, of course, name, address, places of employment, possibly a social security number, credit card, things like that. And the more information that can be verified, the more likely you are to be the person you say you are. However, with that being said, identity theft is relatively common in today's world. So if somebody pretends to be somebody, they can easily set up a PKI certificate and then fake everything from there. So Bob could actually be Dave if Dave stole Bob's identity. Okay, PKI and its components. We're going to be looking for the CA, Certificate Authority, the RA, the Certificate Repository, and Certificate Revocation System. Okay, CAs and RAs. There's Registration Authority. In some PKI environments, especially ones with smart cards, they'll have the Registration Authority, which is the person that basically looks at both IDs, makes sure that you are who you say you are, you're physically there, you have to sign things, and this validates the user's identity. If you're going through places like Thought or VeriSign, a lot of times the Registration Authority is just the website where you put in information and then it contacts the third party and then validates it through there. But this right here is it cannot create certificates. It just validates the identity. Then there's Certificate Authority. These create digital certificates. This bind users' identity created by the Registration Authority to a public key and maintain certificate through its lifetime. And the common lifetime you'll see with most CAs, for example, like through some of the commercial entities, is going to be 1 year. After the year, it dies and you have to get a new certificate. And the main reason for that is, of course, they want to revalidate you at each time to make sure that nobody's stolen the certificate, public or private key, and basically makes things a little bit more secure. However, a lot of people that run their own PKI servers, if you look at the actual expiration dates, you'll see that it's no longer a year after the creation. Sometimes it may be 10 years after the creation, or sometimes even longer. So yeah, again, back to the PKI server that I saw that was running on a current pen test that was unknown to the organization. The certificate was a full 10-year certificate, which basically means that somebody probably went through there and didn't want to have to deal with it every year and put it on there. Okay, let's walk through an example. Okay, Bob wants a PKI certificate. Bob sends a request to the authority, registration authority. The RA validates Bob's identity, again, usually through some sort of either personal contact, photo identification, driver's license number, whatnot. The RA sends a request to the certificate authority, their CA. The CA generates the certificate and sends it to Bob. Bob's identity is now bound to the public key that is embedded in the digital certificate. You need to know the difference between an RA and a CA, not just registration authority and certificate authority, but what an RA stands for and CA stands for. There are very few things on the CISSP that are probably going to be the acronyms. If anything is, it's very likely CA is going to be an acronym. But it's probably not going to be. But again, they usually spell things out rather than the acronyms, but this is a possibility. Okay, digital certificates. Their characteristics are currently using the X509 version 3, associates public key with the owner, and then digitally signed with a certificate authority. Then it goes, if you look at the digital certificate, you'll see all kinds of variables in it. Again, such as version, serial number, which is a unique number for the certificate, the algorithm which it's going to use. For example, some you may see like RSA or whatnot. There's the issuer, which is name of certificate issuer, which is usually either going to be, for example, like Thought, VeriSign, or the PKI server itself. You see the validity, the subject, name of the owner, then also subject public key information, all the way through to the subject unique ID. So each certificate is supposed to be unique, and the nice thing is it tells what algorithm it's using. So whenever you're trying to validate it, you just use the algorithm specifically with the digital certificate. There's many different algorithms that you can use. There's also the capability of doing like MD or SHA.
Is the X509 also unique to the machine it's installed in? So if Bob had 3 laptops, does he have the same X509 on each laptop, or does he have 3 different?
Most people will do 3 different certificates. For the main reason is they want to individualize the item. So if one gets compromised, the other 2 can still work. You can do it to where each one has the same one, but most people do. If they have 3 different systems, they'll do 3 different X509s, unless they're going through, for example, like the smart cards, which is going to be your PKI certificate, and then that is universal to every system that you touch. So, okay, this is an example of the same information in the previous slide. You have the version number, the serial number. This signature is going to be the MD5 RSA instead of like SHA 1 RSA. You have the issuer, which is root SGA authority, and public keys, the RSA 1024-bit, and so forth. So this is a common thing that you'll probably see when looking in Internet Explorer for the certificate-specific information. This is actually really good information because if you're trying to do an attack on the system, you can go through and say that it's an older version or it's a weak key because the algorithm we're using or the hashing algorithm or whatnot. So, and then you can also do the valid from. For example, this one right here looks like a 5-year cert. So it's valid from July 16th, 1999 to July 16th, 2004. So as soon as it hits 2004, it should error on any browser that tries to connect to it. And here's the interesting thing. There's a specific list of things that a browser will do or any piece of software trying to validate these certificates. First thing they do is saying, is this a trusted certificate issuer, or CA? If it's not trusted, that's the first line of error. It instantly pops up and says it's an untrusted. The next one it goes through, it sees if the digital signature matches. If it matches, then it goes to the next area, which is going to be, has it expired? And if it's expired, then again, it's going to error. And then the next area it goes to, is it on a known revocation list? So there's basically 4 error steps that are going to go through it. Some applications, when they give an error, they will give you the information, but it looks very similar to all the rest of the errors. For example, the no, yes, or cancel. So a lot of people will instantly get used to the first error internally that says it's an untrusted certificate authority, and then instantly hit yes to continue, which is usually not suggested, or it's never suggested, but usually actually says not suggested. So whenever you hit that, usually you're going to see the same general content on every error message on a lot of the applications that are out there. But if you do the view more detail or look at it even closer, you usually see that it says it's untrusted, it's a bad certificate or invalid certificate, or that it's been expired, or it's been on a revocation list. So closer detail or closer knowledge, or just looking at it a little bit better, will tell you where it's failing. And if it's coming from an untrusted certificate authority, that's probably one of the only times that you may be able to trust it if you know exactly where it's coming from. But the problem is somebody may be faking the certificate, and that's why they give that error. Is somebody may be doing a man-in-the-middle attack on you and then actually have a real certificate CA or PKI server on their system and then giving you a fake certificate. So as soon as you trust that one, then all the communications could easily be sniffed or faked. Okay, other components in the PKI. There's a repository and CRLs. CRLs, the certificate revocation list. This is where certificates can be revoked. A user loses private key, employee leaves the company, name changes, to where anything changes in the certificate, you put it up on the CRL. And the CRL basically is what's supposed to be validated before the PKI finishes. So if you look at that certificate, it's going to say that this is a bad one, don't trust it. CRL is a list of certificates that have been revoked, basically digitally signed by the CA, and method to tell others not to trust a current public key that they hold for a specific entity, person, or asset. Okay, certificate directory, or the repository, is storage of certificates, usually publicly accessible, and each certificate is digitally signed, so there's no reason to be concerned about their modification, because the digital signature, just like in an email, is going to be a separate area outside of the rest of their content. So if anything in this portion is changed, the digital signature is not going to match. Okay, Stego. How many people have played with steganography before? There are a lot of tools out there that do this. Basically, steganography is hiding information in a type of media. Before it used to be, there were cases seen where individuals were trying to send over spreadsheets, and they choose BMPs. And BMPs are basically uncompressed images. So in the least significant bit in BMP, you can, the data that's in there is not really counted towards the image. It's just empty space or blank space. So what you can do is put your code in that least significant bit, and then whenever the image transfers, it's not going to be a different size. It's going to look the same. It's not going to alter the image per se or the file much. What's going to happen is once it gets to the other side, they then rip everything out of that least significant bit and then post it back into a file. But for example, people are putting spreadsheets in BMPs because BMPs are generally large files. It's not uncommon to see a good quality picture in a BMP being 5 meg, 6 meg. So when you're transferring that over the line, when people see it, it doesn't really trip that many red flags. But if you have a JPEG, it's going to be 5 or 6 meg, at least until some of these newer cameras came out. It used to be that was relatively common to basically trip a red flag as well. But again, with the more megapixels on a lot of these digital cameras, the bigger the images are going to be, which is basically training people to associate images with larger files. But for example, you can also not only just do it with pictures, you can do it with audios, videos. There's a big concern about terrorist organizations using steganography in the open market. Basically, like on Google Images, eBay, places like that. They actually had a commercial entity went through and went to eBay and downloaded about 1.5 million images. Out of those, a large portion of those were positive for Stego. The funny part about it was, whenever they did the study, is they couldn't find one that was a guaranteed Stego. Because here's the problem with steganography. There's so many tools out there that, as far as encrypting the data that's inside of the item, that there is no commercially universal cracker for all the Stego tools. For example, like S-Tools. That does, I believe, 4 types of encryption. So whenever you're going to try to brute force it, you need to know what encryption you're trying to break. There's also a few others, for example, like F4 camouflage. There are open source brute forcers for that, but they only have the specific algorithm they're trying to go into. But you don't have to encrypt the data if you're doing Stego. But that was the interesting part, is after about 1.5 million images, they couldn't validate that one actually did have Stego in it. Because here's the problem. Things bit shift. If you're transferring a file from point A to point B, there's a very good possibility that bits could fall in the proverbial bit bucket. So the file's not going to match an MD5. Things get put into images when they're copied from one server to another. They're downloaded from one system to another over the internet. So a lot of these things, the least significant bit would actually be filled with content, like in a BMP or whatnot, or the file will be changed. So you'll get a lot of false positives in looking for Stego. But for example, like this picture right here, is that what they could do is just put content within the item itself, and then just, for example, like a small text file. They could even put a movie in an image. But again, if they put a movie inside of an image, then it's going to be either a very small movie or increase the size of the image. The majority of the people that do Stego try to keep the image size from changing. So for example, if it's a 130K JPEG file, they do not want to add a 5 meg file into that 130K, because that's going to, of course, increase the size of the file. They want to actually hide it from people noticing that it's changed. Okay, there's This hides data, places bits in a WAV file or cryptographic. How many people here have heard of the DC3 challenge? DC3 is the DoD cybercrime challenge. Basically what ends up happening is that if you are an entity within the U.S., commercial, educational, government or whatnot, or individual, you can compete in this computer forensics competition. And part of the competition, they had, at least last year, they gave several audio files with Stego in it. So basically your job was to find these audio files and see if they had Stego. If they did have Stego, try to rip the information out. And a couple of them were using some common tools, and basically just go through there and then try to find any information out of it. And usually it was simple enough to where you can use open source items to crack it. There's also a lot of marketing companies will use this. Digital watermarks, they're used to detect illegal copies of items. What they'll do is they may put a specific signature or a specific, let's say, MD5 hash within the least significant bit. And by doing that, if somebody downloads the item and then claims it's their own, it's, again, their own poor man's copyright because it's proving that they did it. So there's also messages can be passed back and forth without anyone knowing, and specialized tools used to carry this out. There's one called S-Tools, like I mentioned before. There's one called Snow, which grabs things and puts things into the white space of an image. There's Camera Shy. It's not as common, and you can't do file within file, but you can do text within a file. Okay, cryptography in use. You have implementations cryptography, you have link encryption, you have end-to-end encryption, you have email encryption, and of course protocol encryption. Link versus end-to-end. With link encryption, you have full frames are encrypted, such as payloads, headers, trailers. You'll see this in like T1 and so forth. It's usually provided by service providers over point-to-point connections, because what they're going to have to do is they'll be able to communicate back and forth, but they own the entire pipe from point A to point B. Usually dedicated to link encryption devices. Each hop has to decrypt the header. If the hop is compromised, all traffic going through that hop can be compromised. And it's a lot more expensive to do this because if you have routing going from point to point, you have to have the decryption device before the router and basically then again after the router, because it's encrypted until that point, then hits the router, needs to figure out where it's going to go, and then has to encrypt itself again and then go down the pipe some more. Okay, data link message is not encrypted. With end-to-end, only the payload of the frame is encrypted. So you don't have to have the decrypto or the encryption devices in front of the router. What ends up happening is people can see where it's coming to and going to, or coming from and going to. This usually takes place through, for example, like email clients or whatnot. Header and trailers are not encrypted, so hops do not need to decrypt and re-encrypt. But when it comes down to it, is that it does leak information on where it came from and where it's going to, which may not be that big of an issue with a lot of organizations. Some people it is. Okay, email standards. Bless you. There's PGP, which is pretty good privacy. This is there's developed by Philip Zimmerman. There's several variants of it as well. There's also GPG, but as far as the test, they want you to know PGP because GPG is the Linux variant of an open source product for it. Okay, it uses passphrases instead of passwords, and it usually does some pretty good entropy, which basically means that the random number generation seed, it has a lot of user interaction. It has a web of trust instead of a hierarchical certificate authority. Basically, users decide how much they will trust each other. And this is a sample of an encrypted message. Of course, there's the begin and the end, so you have to have their encryption key or their key to be able to decrypt the item. So never again, if you're going to be encrypting to somebody, you're going to get the target's public key, and then they're going to decrypt it with their private key. Okay, these are things, again, you're going to basically just have to memorize. SHTTP is not standard really anymore. Nobody uses it. Basically, it protects each message, not the communication channel. It's older and less used technology. There's HTTPS. This is HTTP that runs on top of SSL. This provides secure communication channel, and all messages and other data is protected. And it's as far as the majority of security tests is concerned. Encryption is there to protect the communications from man in the middle, sometimes replay, but usually man in the middle and sniffing. But there are ways that you can fake in real life. You can fake the SSL certificate, and basically, as long as they trust it, whenever you get that error, they hit yes to continue, and then basically you decrypt it at your side and then send it on to the actual server. There's SSL, originally developed by Netscape, requires a PKI to use. Server authenticates to client. Optional client can authenticate to server, and works at the transport layer. That is something to memorize, transport layer of the OSI. But HTTPS uses SSL encryption. This right here, though, you do not have to use HTTPS for SSL. That's why a lot of people, when they use SSH, they may make a SSL connection over SSH and basically make a covert channel, trying to bypass a lot of people that are sniffing the wire. So they think it's an actual web server that they're connecting to, as opposed to an actual SSH server. But SSL basically comes down to smaller VPNs. Instead of your IPsec VPN, then you're looking at the port VPN. So the SSL is going to be the one socket. Okay, SSL in the OSI model. There's SSL at the transport layer. You have your specific application. It goes into the protocol. Once the protocol has enveloped all the application layer, then again it goes to the transport. So you're looking at application, presentation, and then transport. SSL connection setup. Server sends client certificate. Client checks to see if signing a CA is a trusted listed browser. And then the client computes the hash of the certificate and compares the message digest of the decrypting CA's public key. The client checks the validity dates of the certificate. And then the client will check the URL the pertaining compared to the URL it's communicating with or that's in the certificate. Because if you have a certificate that is going to a different URL or a different issuer, then it's also going to say that things don't mesh up, something's bad. The client extracts the server's public key from the certificate, creates a session key using symmetric cryptography, and then the client encrypts the session key with the server's public key and then sends it over. The server decrypts using the private key. So the beginning transactions are going to be using asymmetric cryptography. And then through the asymmetric cryptography, the key is exchanged and then jumps down to symmetric cryptography. Okay, secure email standard, the good old SMIME. Basically, this is secure multi-purpose internet mail extensions. This allows for encryption, hashing, digital signatures to take place in a uniform manner. This covers email client vendors follow the standard. And this is why users can exchange emails even if they're using different email clients. And this right here, when I was mentioning you can only trust a network for the people that you can trust on the network. If you're doing any email, for example, at a cyber cafe, airport, hotel, or whatnot, this is probably the best way to send email messages. You always want to encrypt if you can. Because if you do send it in clear text, then you're opening yourself up for sniffing. Okay, SSH, secure protocol. Secure access to remote systems. Basically, you can run different protocols other than a SSH tunnel. Should be used instead of Telnet or R utilities. Why is Telnet insecure?
Clear text, right?
Clear text. So basically, anything and everything you do in Telnet can easily be sniffed over the network. And again, back over to Wi-Fi. If the Wi-Fi is not encrypted, then you don't even have to be connected to the network to see what they're doing over Telnet. Okay, server and client generate their own public-private keys. Many times use the Diffie-Hellman as its key exchange agreement protocol. And then, like many other protocols, must carry out a handshake process, basically agree upon parameters to set up the SSH tunnel. Okay, SET, secure electronic transactions. Developed by Visa and MasterCard for how to have more secure connections and transactions for the credit cards. Basically, the goal is to replace SSL. It was slow in acceptance and deployment. And standard died about 10 years ago, but it still may come up because it is a big benchmark within the crypto community. Basically, it uses PKI to protect sensitive data and authenticates each hop in the transaction series. Okay, the players in SET. There's the issuer, which is the cardholder's bank. There's the card holder, which is the individual authorized to use the card. The merchant, which is the entity providing goods via the web. The acquirer, which is the merchant's bank. Then the payment gateway, which is the process merchant payment and can be acquirer. And from the card holder, they send basically the information to the merchant, and then it hits the gateway. And through each hop, it's supposed to be encrypted using the SET protocols. And then by the time it gets to the issuer, validated, then it goes back to the card holder and says that yes, you can use the card. It was either authenticated, authorized, or it was not authorized. Wrong information, and no longer gives them the information. But basically, that's what it's trying to say is each hop did the encryption. IPsec. You may see this not only in crypto, but in the telecommunications domain. So they may throw some in there. This is something you definitely need to memorize. Is everything about IPsec. Needs to become your best friend. Basically developed because IP4 has no security mechanisms. This is integrated in IPv6. It sets up a secure channel between computers instead of applications. It's at the network layer security. And with it being at the network layer security as opposed to the transport. The transport basically means that you're at the socket layer, you have the specific port, that whole portion is going to be encrypted. At the network layer, now you have all IPs. For example, you have an IP on their network, so all ports are going to be available to everybody on that network and vice versa. So you're going to have your 0 through 65,535 ports on both TCP, UDP. There's also the ICMP protocol and ARP and WARP, and basically everything from the network layer up is going to be communicatable to the person or the entity that you VPN into, which is both a good and bad thing. For example, if you're on a VPN that's using the SSL, you may go into it to where you're only able to communicate over a website or through FTP or through SSH, but you might not be able to do printing. But through here, you would not only have access to the printer through the normal routes, you'd have access to other people's shared drives. But from an attacker's perspective, if that node is infected with a virus, it's going to spread to everybody else just like they are on the same physical network. Because what you end up doing is you become part of that same physical network. There's actually two ways to connect. Is that whenever you're doing an IPsec type VPN, there's like this regular tunneling, which means that you're on the internet, and then as soon as you get connected to that VPN, you are no longer on the internet. You are on their network. If their network allows you internet access, you're now going through them. Some devices will even check to see if you have multiple network cards. If you have 2 NICs, it then associates both NICs or all the NICs that you have directly with that VPN tunnel to secure your organization or the place that you're connecting to from the end user. Some pieces of software, some utilities will actually do what's called split tunneling. Split tunneling basically makes it to where you can connect to the VPN area, so you have full IP access back and forth on this system, and then when you go to the internet, if you're not looking for any specific resource internally, you now go through your internet connection as opposed to encapsulating everything from point A to point B. The danger with that is now that if you connect to a secured environment, everything that you do on this side, for one thing, cannot be monitored. The bad part about that is, from a business perspective, is if you go to a site and get infected, the business can't protect you from that. So if you get backdoored because you go to the wrong area, now your system's backdoored, it's now shared, so now somebody from the outside could theoretically bounce through you into the VPN network, into the basically real world. Okay, key issues with IPsec. There's Internet Key Exchange, the IKE protocol. There's several applications that specifically look for IKE going over the internet and will try to attack them as well, trying to basically brute force VPNs. Basically, this is used to negotiate the SA between two entities and to exchange key material. This is basically a suite of the ISSACAMP and the Oakley protocols. The ISSACAMP, which is the Internet Security Association and Key Management Protocol, is a framework for key negotiation and does not do the actual negotiation. And the Oakley protocol, it's a determination protocol. It negotiates the key information using the Diffie-Hellman algorithm. And I hate to say it, with the IPsec, this is something that's very important for both the crypto and the telecommunications domain, so it's something basically just memorize. Okay, IPsec handshake process. Bless you. Two routers need to be set up basically with the IPv6 or IPv4 using the IPsec. What ends up happening is they will go through a full handshake process. They must agree upon what algorithms, modes of operations, protocols, and so forth to use. And then this information must be saved so the handshake does not need to take place for every transaction. Both handshake information is stored in the SA, which is security associates on both sides. The SAs are directional, and one is required for the inward and one is required for the outward. And also each router knows which SA is to be used by the security perimeter index, which is the SPI value in the sender's header.
Just a question.
Yes.
There was one slide that referred to IPsec sets up a secure channel between computers. This one is talking about networks, isn't it?
It can be both. It can be either or. If you do computers, a lot of times it would even be software from a client to another system.
Sure.
So you're encapsulating the actual packet. And then something like this could be you're encapsulating more than the packet, such as the IP, everything. Okay, ESP and AH can work in the transport mode. It basically goes back to here, which offers payload protection headers up to the network layer, and then tunnel mode. This protects the whole packet. The least, I really want to say least secure, because it does have information leakage of where it came from and where it's going to. It's going to be the transport mode, because if you're doing a packet sniffing, you know it came from IP address XYZ and it's going to the specific IP. With the tunnel mode, if you're sniffing, you're not going to see where it actually originated from, because that's being encapsulated. You're going to see, for example, the router or the gateway of a specific device, but you will not see as much. However, the tunnel mode is a lot more expensive as far as the protocol is concerned. Oh, that's fun. It's going to be a lot more expensive because of the simple issue that there's more encryption going on. Not to say that either is going to be less secure when it comes down to it, because the other is still going to basically encrypt the payload. Okay, these are the attacks that, again, you need to memorize. The cipher-only attack. Basically, this is an attack where the attacker only has the ciphertext to work from. Usually, they're going to have to try to do some sort of brute force against it because they don't know what's the end result's going to be. The goal of all these attacks is to reverse the encryption process and uncover the encryption keys of all of the attacks. There's known plain text, which basically you know what's going to go into the ciphertext. So this attacker has obtained a cipher and plain text. Usually you'll see this, like I mentioned before, in the good old days. They knew what was going to be encrypted because a lot of people started off their letters a certain way, for example, like Dear Sir, and then some other salutation. So if it's doing any sort of block encryption, you already have part of the ciphertext and a known part of the plain text. Or in this aspect, you could be sniffing the network, and you have something that they've done before, and you also have the cipher. Okay, this one right here, chosen plain text. The attacker can choose what plain text is encrypted by the victim's system. And again, the whole process is trying to put whatever you can in there, look at the ciphertext, see how it changes, then try to derive the key from the changes. Then a chosen ciphertext. The attacker can choose the ciphertext that will be decrypted by the victim's system. So again, which one's going to be the least knowledgeable attack? Or the one where the attacker has the least access? Yep, ciphertext only. There's the replay attack. Attacker obtains a set of credentials and sends them to an authentication service, such as captures usernames, passwords, tokens, and tickets. Usually what people try to do is they'll look at the negotiation. As soon as that negotiation occurs, then they'll try to replay that and then try to authenticate the same way. Okay, timestamps and sequence numbers are used to protect against these attacks. Again, it's not 100% protection, because if the attacker gets lucky, they get the right sequence number or timestamp or whatnot that they can spoof. Theoretically, it's still possible to go in there and replay the session with the new technology. There's man in the middle. The attacker injects themselves in between two users and reads messages going back and forth, or possibly manipulates the messages going back and forth. Sequence numbers and digital signatures are used to countermeasure this type of attack. For the test, sequence number and digital signatures prevent this attack from happening. However, on the social engineering side, like mentioned before, you can use the DSNF suite and then K and enable to do a man-in-the-middle attack. But what's happening is you're breaking the entire encryption scheme because you are not stealing their certificate. What's happening is you are forcing them or tricking them into accepting your certificate. So the crypto system has not been broken from them to you. It's a perfectly fine path. They just trusted the wrong one. And then you make a legitimate connection from your system to the actual server that they're trying to connect to. So in that aspect, the cryptography has not been busted or broken. It's been the social engineering of the actual target. So the man in the middle, this aspect is not really feasible, but the one for social engineering is.